And ultimately, through my years working with swimming, it always comes down to fundamentals. What are they fundamentally doing correctly? And that needs to be in place first.
Welcome to the Effortless Swimming Podcast, the show that helps swimmers and triathletes love the water, become a better swimmer, and live a better life. Here's your host, Brenton Ford.
Welcome to episode 138 of the Effortless Swimming Podcast. My guest today is Hodierne, who is the Biomechanist for NSWIS, which is the New South Wales Institute of Sport. And the title for this episode is High Level Biomechanics for Weekend Warriors. So, Ryan, you work with a very high level of swimmer. And what I want to chat today about is everything that you do with those top level guys, but how people who are maybe training for triathlon or swimming, they might be swimming 2 or 3 times a week. How can they apply some of this stuff that you work on to their own swimming? So first of all, welcome to the podcast and thanks for joining me.
Yeah, great. Cheers. Thanks for having me on. And
the way that we got introduced was we're both advisors for a company called Sensarii, which are developing a pretty cool sort of not power meter, but a device that measures the force and the direction of the force for swimmers. And so that's how we got introduced, and we've both had the chance to test that stuff out. And there's some pretty cool stuff that's coming out of that. And what were your thoughts on the device, and how do you see it being used?
Yeah, well, I've obviously showed a lot of interest in the device to start off with, and I know there are means of obviously extrapolating similar types of information from other devices, but this device just seemed to kind of hit home to me because they had obviously spent a heap of time through a phase of R&D to produce something out the back end that would make a difference to swimming. So just looking at it in the way they're actually displaying a lot of the information or the output that was, coming from the actual pressure sensors on the hand, it just made sense to me. So yeah, we show keen interest in that, obviously trying to push it more to not necessarily just routine use like a heart rate monitor, but ultimately trying to, jazz up the device that it's actually going to give us more worth or more direct output of force during swimming as well.
And how have you seen your job change over time with the use of technology? And because obviously there's so much data that we can get these days, and how do you simplify it to make it useful and to be able to obviously communicate that as well to the swimmers and the coaches?
Yeah, great question. And yeah, that's something we always kind of grapple with on a daily basis from our end, because there is just so much out there. And in our day and age, obviously, we're at the mercy of all the technology that comes out. And often there is so much. I mean, if you could almost relate it back to the types of apps that you have on your device, everything sounds great until you download the thing and then you find it's actually worthless, or that there might be potentially a better one out there. But you end up downloading all these things and trying to work it out from there. And that's ultimately what we do with a lot of the stuff that comes out, in particular to obviously the discipline we're in, biomechanics, in the different fields of analysis we do there. And in this case, I mean, more pertinent to swimming. There are a lot of stuff, a lot of devices that come out that, especially, equipment, paddles, fins, kickboards, all that type of thing, that change, and people seem to think that they're going to reinvent swimming. So we technically become, the gatekeepers of those things, and really need to look into it, in greater depth to understand actually what that device is, the value that device is going to potentially add, or whether it just is a gimmick and we don't need to look in that direction at all. So that's ultimately what we're doing almost on a daily basis. We're also looking for kind of new and great ideas out there, and hence the reason we kind of look towards Sensarii to say, okay, well, that definitely is something we could make better use of down the track once we start understanding the outputs that they are delivering. And, we obviously go through a whole process of validation as well to ultimately make sure that whatever those devices are putting out is valid and accurate and replicable over periods of time. And that's ultimately what we do, because at our level, I mean, if things are changing and shifting from one day to the next, we lose that trust. And that trust relationship with coach and athlete at the highest level is crucial to obviously the impact we have as scientists and to the relationship and overall performance at the end of the day too.
Mm. And what do you do to how do you prefer to communicate with the swimmer and the coach? You're working with them together, and are you using video, or is it just through constant communication, like seeing them on a daily basis? How does that typically look for you?
Yeah, so at the highest level, generally a lot of my interaction with programs or with different squads or athletes and coaches is scheduled in up front. So it's not very ad hoc at all. It's definitely planned into the schedule. So it would be the rest of the service providers in a team, in a high-performance team, which include the physiologists and nutritionists, strength conditioning, physiotherapy, all of that type of stuff. All of them are included in a plan right at the beginning of the season. And obviously, interaction with us ebbs and flows over a period of time. And from one athlete to the next, they have different interactions with different specialists at different times as well. And that's all kind of guided or led by the coach, I would say, and all specifically around that particular athlete. And then, as time progresses, we obviously ensure that we're progressing in the right direction. And through a lot of the stuff that we do, if we're adjusting technique, you would know very well in this regard. If you're adjusting technique, quite often you expect regression to start off with. So people potentially get slower or feel a little more awkward in the pool and just doesn't feel quite right. But through persistence, we hope to take, those 2 steps forward, following that 1 step back. So that's ultimately what we're trying to do over a period of time. And then if we look at some of the high-performance programs that I'm dealing with, ultimately my interaction is through the coach, and he directs, obviously, the service I provide. But when it gets to, the nitty-gritty and right at the crux, my involvement with the athlete and that connection is very, very close. And I ultimately need to understand what they're trying to do and how they feel or think about whatever they're trying to do, and refine that in a way that is going to make them better. And this is really looking for marginal gains, and that's where that trust comes in again, as I mentioned earlier on. Because now we're talking about things that are very groundbreaking. It's things that potentially haven't been seen before and all that type of thing. Now, if we go back a few steps and consider age group development swimming or your average Joe just trying to get better, often you can take quite a blanket approach on things and conform to a certain norm. But at our level, dealing at the highest level, the best are always doing something different. And we're trying to obviously make better use of that difference to get more out of them.
And is there something that comes to mind when you think of something that's groundbreaking? Is there something over the last couple of years that you may have thought differently about in the past, and you've looked at it and studied it further and gone, oh, actually, this is how it is?
Yeah, for sure. Probably a few things I can think of, but over a period of time, my biggest realization, and you find it quite strange, I deal with technology at very different levels, and we have state-of-the-art devices that we use, measuring outgoing velocity, measuring acceleration in different directions on the swimmer, wearing like IMUs. There is just so much information we can get from athletes and all of that. We also use kind of 2D motion capture, where we actually calibrate to a certain space and can actually give you an indication as to kick frequencies, kick amplitudes, and underwater kicks, different metrics in stroke too. And we could look at all of that in massive depth. But in the end of the day, it's how you interpret that information that's key. And I find a really happy space with dealing with information and sharing the information that I feel is going to make the most impact to athlete and coach. And that's probably the space I kind of like dealing in. And ultimately, through my years working with swimming, it always comes down to fundamentals. What are they fundamentally doing correctly? And that needs to be in place first. And obviously the audience, from your view, I think it's quite easy to kind of get caught up in what everyone else is doing, and the guy in the lane next to you might be doing something that you think might better suit you, or it just looks great because he's swimming 5 minutes quicker over his initial swim in a triathlon, that you must be doing what he's doing. But ultimately, we just need to go back to consider what we're doing well first, what got us there in the first place, and then ensure that we have all those fundamentals in place, that we can build off of those to obviously get better or more out of what we're trying to do in the end of the day.
Yeah, that's something that I've come to learn over the last 12 years of coaching, is there's so many different ways to do every single stroke. And so you want to work with the strengths of each swimmer and work with all the things that they've got, and different heights, different wingspans, just different strengths within their stroke, and tailoring it that way. And like similar to you, we work with a lot of different swimmers, and just seeing that wide range of styles, and then there's so much sort of knowledge there, or so much data, I guess, to interpret, and then to be able to interpret that and give them the advice that you think will be best for that swimmer based on what you've seen in the past. Do you find that's sort of like the art of what you do?
Oh, no, definitely. So you hit the nail on the head there. And that ultimately is what it comes down to. So we're scientists, and we think in a very scientific way, and we love information. We love, very complex graphs and very complex information. But ultimately that makes no sense to the athlete, right? If you tell him to move his arm or his leg at 2 degrees difference, then it's going to make that impact. He's going to look at you with a frown on his face. With some swimmers' mind, you probably go to that extent and want that level of detail. But ultimately, they're not wanting you to be that specific. They're wanting you to give more of an overarching idea as to what they need to do better and how they could potentially do it, and what the potential outcome is going to be as well. So in that, we often deal with heaps of information, and sometimes that information, is going to prove to us that what they're doing is totally incorrect and they need to change drastically. Or ultimately, it proves to us that what they're doing is incredibly good, and we can just refine whatever they're doing there. And that's how ultimately we look at a lot of the information we gather over a period of time. And we need to align with the coach, and the coach obviously has his certain concepts and ideas and philosophies that he sticks to. And, down the track, he gets different athletes through his hands, and, his ways and means of dealing with athletes or successes he's had in the past is probably what he's going to tend toward. But having different athletes through is going to force that coach to actually think in a slightly different manner. And if we produce similar information to that coach over a period of time, we either prove to him that what he's doing is probably right, or we try and prove to him in a way that obviously what he needs to be doing should be something slightly different to get a different outcome of that athlete.
Mm. Yeah, it's in terms of getting them to make those changes. One of the things that I've found has worked well over the past few years with swimmers is explaining, similar to what you mentioned, explaining this is how it might feel when you make the change. Yeah. This is what you'll probably need to expect, and it's that discomfort, it's that awkwardness, and possible regression as well. And explaining those two things has made a big difference, especially compared to just telling them what they need to do. Because if they're not expecting that if they're expecting to get faster straight away, or if they're expecting it just to feel fine, then they're not going to actually make that change, because they want to steer away from that discomfort because they think it's wrong. And just the communication and framing it up front, for me, at least with the athletes I've worked with, I've seen that make a big difference. So I try to be very clear up front every time I'm working with a new swimmer that this is what to expect and this is how it may feel. And even at that sort of top level, is that something that you've had to make very clear with them?
Yes, it is. And often, dealing in a fluid environment, the human being is not necessarily made to be in that space for, the durations of time that the top-level athletes spend in the water. And ultimately, regard your elite-level swimmer as amphibious, but still looking very human. So it almost doesn't make sense to move the human body through a body of water as quickly as possible. It is almost, it doesn't make sense. But ultimately we do that quite well. And, charging on, we're seeing world records being broken now, and level of swimming performance has just lifted in recent years, I would say. And we do incredibly well as non-water beings moving through the water really fast. But in saying that, it's also a very unnatural environment to be in. So sometimes just doing something slightly different will come up with a very different outcome. And that's often where I try and explore different ranges on a continuum. And I'm a big fan of, shifting or exploring kind of that continuum from, the polar opposites or, varying extremes. So I was watching the video of you, having improved your technique, in the past year or something, and you were saying that you were looking at, just improving the crossover at the front end of your stroke, both left and right. And that's quite a common thing, and probably one of the go-tos or fundamental things that you need to not do in freestyle is cross the midline on entry. And watching you do that, ultimately my approach would then be to say to you, okay, well, try and, reach out as far as you possibly can, way out of shoulder width, and try and almost touch the side of the pool and enter there. So I shift you to that next extreme, and you might even, just by thinking in the extreme, you would probably go to where it's more central. As opposed to going out to touch the side of the pool, you probably are going to go a little more central, because your extreme or your average or middle ground on the continuum is that skewed to crossing the midline. But something that drastic would probably find a better middle ground than the actual extreme. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. That's something I try and do with swimmers is, if they do, let's say, like, because my crossover there, like, it was a bit of a crossover, but much less than I've seen with a lot of the guys who have come through our clinics, like, some really big crossovers. And so for me to actually get on those, in line with the shoulder, it still had to feel really wide, and it still had to feel really wide. So for someone who's way across the center, for them, it's going to have to feel like they're not even anywhere close to the center. And by having it as like this is the time to experiment. This is the time. If you overcorrect, that's fine. We can always come back into where you were, but encouraging them to really overdo the thing that they're trying to do. I love that as a way to help people at least start to make that change or get a sense of where they are.
Yeah, for sure. And that whole level of implicit learning there and creating awareness for themselves is where it's all at in that regard. And, people feel water in a very different way, and swimming is a very kinesthetic sport. And obviously you have your visual learners, you have your audio learners, you've got, various different levels of learning. But I find the visual always brings home what you're trying to get at. Although it's awkward and that type of thing, just seeing that the hand is potentially, passing in more of a correct line, people start readjusting their own awareness or, sensory perception in their head as to what is correct. So you almost fast track that whole process with a visual, I feel.
Yeah, that's good. I like to try and do basically what you're talking about, contrast drills, where you, to get them to develop that awareness, is you get them to go extreme in one way and extreme in the other way. Mm-hmm. And then obviously that middle ground is probably where they want to be. But just, that's a great way for developing that awareness. And I was talking to a friend of mine who's a physio, and I was telling him how, he was actually talking about a swimmer he's a long distance swimmer, came to him with some shoulder issues, and he was just talking to him about, all right, why is his shoulder hurting? And there's a lot of reasons why his shoulder could be hurting. But one of the things that the physio found was like this swimmer wasn't kicking at all, and everything was just coming from basically above from the shoulders upwards. So there was very little hip rotation. There was no connection through the hips and through the torso. And so one of the things he got him to do was just to start doing some kicking within his training sessions. And over the course of a couple of weeks, it took a lot of the the pain out of the shoulder because everything wasn't originating from the shoulders. It was much more connected. And the thing he mentioned there was, if something down the chain is hurting, you usually want to look at something closer in to where it all starts. And I think that's at least for me when I'm analysing stroke, it's like, that's an interesting way to approach it and a good way to approach it, because if someone's, maybe someone's coming under the body, it could be that their posture and through their hips and through their core, maybe there's something going on there that they need to fix in order to fix that thing down the chain.
Yeah, very much so. It is the case. I mean, shoulder is probably one of the more prevalent injuries in swimming. And often, even at the highest level, the athletes under fatigue all resort to wanting to stroke harder or feeling greater pressure on the hand, but being in a very compromised position under fatigue. And that's generally when the shoulders start getting overloaded and little niggles start popping up. And then, obviously go into, the deep doldrums of injury, and are laid off for a while. So I can often, pick inklings of that happening with a lot of, freestyle swimmers in particular. And I always try and go to the kick as well, and the benefit of the kick in absolute, improving stroke length. So the kick has, compounding factor to increasing stroke length. It's not necessarily over kicking, but a consistency in the kick. And then bringing the consistency of the kick to the timing of the stroke is crucial. So whether it's a 2-beat, a 4-beat, or a 6-beat kick, it needs to be timed in with the actual stroke to get the outcome or the benefit of the kick itself. So if we consider the kick in isolation, and we do kick sets, just the kickboard or head down with a snorkel, and you get your top performer in the kick set comes out, right? And we all know who that is. Then we go to a pull set with pull buoy and bands with paddles, and the guys go down. We probably get to know who the best puller is in the squad, but very seldom in the squads I've worked with at sub-elite, even to elite level, are those two individuals, the best kicker, or the guy that won the kick set and the guy that won the stroke set, are they the best swimmer? More often, potentially, the best stroker is the best swimmer, but very seldom are they the best swimmer. It's the one that's more or less average or just above average in both kick and pull that generally is the guy that is the best swimmer. And ultimately, then, the kick is only the kick is of greater worth tied in with stroke. If that makes sense. So the propulsion we get from the kick is compounded when it's actually tied into timing of the actual stroke. So what you mentioned there about your physio friend and with an athlete with a shoulder injury and all that type of thing, going back down to kick and just understanding the concept of the kick, we see that at the highest level too. A lot of athletes are rendered out for a period of time, and they need to get back in the water, and we need them in the water as soon as possible because it is just such an unnatural environment. So a lot of the coaches just resort to kick, and often with a lot of them who were average kickers to start off with become really good kickers. And the moment they turn the stroke on, all of a sudden you just see them swimming in a totally different way. And it just seems it's often much better than they were to start off with. And
is there certain drills or ways you try and get those swimmers to feel in order to help them connect up the timing of their kick and the rest of their stroke? Is there a couple of go-tos that you have?
Yeah, there is. There's actually one that I do quite regularly, and it's very, very difficult to work out. And I even have top level swimmers, guys that be making finals at a world championships in freestyle, struggle with this one. But I feel if you can master this at any level, I feel you're winning, or you're definitely on the right track. And this is one you could potentially, use yourself or, share with the guys out there. But the whole understanding of timing, now we have different rhythms or rates that we want to swim at, and we all kind of have more or less of an idealistic rating that we conform to. So subconsciously, if we're just swimming nicely in the water, we generally have a certain rate that we conform to. So let's consider that rate as your kind of average, your middle ground, right? Now, if we develop a kick, and let's say we keep the kick a 4-beat kick. So four beats of the kick within one stroke cycle. So from right hand entry in to right hand entry in, they're 4 kicks. Now, we keep the 4-beat kick going consistently. I like the athletes shifting from a lower rating to what their norm was, from a low rating through to the first third of the pool, and then shifting to their middle ground rating, and then shifting to a slightly higher rating. And for you as the coach, or someone on the side of the pool deck looking in, you need to see those very definite gear shifts over the 3 ratings. So kick stays exactly the same, but the rating changes over 3/3 of the pool. And then what you do is once you get to the opposite side, say in a 50-meter pool, then you try and aim to keep your stroke rate at that middle ground, right? Keep your stroke rate at that middle ground, and then you start altering your kick around your actual stroke rate. And this is where it gets really tough. Because ultimately, if we think about running even, if we're running on the spot, the faster we move our arms, the faster we move our legs, right? In swimming, it doesn't necessarily need to work that way. So the moment we rate up, we have this tendency to want to kick more and often overkick, and that becomes a very reactive, inefficient type stroke. So overcoming this one is probably the biggest challenge for most, but generally comes with the best outcome. If we can adjust kick tempo around consistent stroke rate. So again, go through your 3 gears, but the kick changes from a 2-beat to a 4-beat to a 6-beat kick, and your rating stays exactly the same.
And that's within that last 50, were you saying? Or you'd go through, say, 3 50s where the first one would be a 2-beat, then a 4-beat, and then a 6-beat?
No, so just through the 50, yeah.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, so...
Yeah, so through the 50, you would go through 3 segments of the 50, break it into 3 segments, and literally to 15 meters. So don't do any underwater, but through 15, through 30, then to 45. That you would to the 15, you'd be doing rating at your lower rate, keeping the kick consistent. Then from 15 to 30, you'd be at your middle ground rate, keeping the kick consistent. Then from 30 to 45 or to the end of the pool, you'd be a higher rate, keeping your kick consistent. And then, rest at the other end of the pool, push off, then try and get up and get your stroke at your normal, at your middle ground to start off with, and don't even kick. And then start bringing a 2-beat kick through the 15, and 15 to 30, increase the kick beat to like 4 kicks. Stroke stays exactly the same. And then through the 30 into the wall, you'd probably pick the kick up to around a 6-beat kick, but the stroke rate stays exactly the same. And the person on the side of the pool, if you start switching it up and you start getting good at this, the coach or your fellow athlete or peer should be looking into the pool and saying you adjusted stroke on that one and you adjusted kick on that one. And if you get to that and it's very defined, then I think you've come a long way.
Oh, that's good. I was becoming a lot more aware of this probably a year and a half ago when I started doing. I did some filming with a swimmer up in Queensland, Andrew Spohr. He was a 200 freestyler, and he used. He was very good with a 4-beat kick, and I was sort of looking at that, and he spoke a bit about it, and then I started to sort of look a little bit deeper into that and started to play around with it myself. And I've found over the course of that 18 months, I've gotten a lot better at being able to shift gears from your 2-beat, 4-beat, 6-beat. And especially for distance swimming, I've found, or like anything 200 meters or more really, but particularly distance swimming, being able to control your effort and output and be a lot more efficient by choosing a 2 or a 4-beat for those longer swims. It really gives you a lot of we can save a lot of effort and energy, but it really helps at least me helps me control my my speed very well, because with the timing of that kick, you can just really settle into a good rhythm, and that's what I find can sort of set it like a consistent breathing pattern, and a good kick is at the basis of a good rhythm there. And and it's something that I hadn't really ever considered much before, and having swum since I was like 4 years of age and only just figuring it out now. And I've been coaching for that long. It's like, well, I can see how some of those guys at the very top may not have, sort of being able to do it straight away, because it's, it's just one of those extra things that that I don't think a lot of people get taught early on.
Oh, for sure, definitely. Timing's key in all strokes, and just how propulsive means from the kick and the stroke work together is crucial. And ultimately, if you talk about efficiency in swimming, that timing goes a very, very long way. And often, if we come up to like an over rotation in a freestyle, so over rotating to the breathing side, often that throws the timing out. And as we fatigue, we breathe for longer. And then all of a sudden, we just become so inefficient because we're rotating so much more to the one side, and through our core are unable to kind of keep our hips up. The hips start dropping, that all of a sudden we start working against ourselves, and the timing just goes out of whack. Even at the highest level, often if you see guys in maybe a 200 freestyle, 400 freestyle, you'd see that one guy, he'd be going out quite strong, and he might be leading the race, let's say. And then he senses through the middle portion of the race or to the back end of the race, that people are starting to kind of, come up on him, and he can feel that he's losing ground, and then he reacts. And once they react, they often lose the timing of their stroke, and all of a sudden you just see them go straight out the back. And that's what we try and prevent athletes from doing, especially if you are kind of that athlete that is a little bit stronger out the front end of your race. Generally, the guys are probably going to be coming back at you towards the end. But even sensing that, you just need to kind of, maintain relatively efficient, relative efficiency within your stroke, good length, good pressure on the water, and all that type of thing. And it all comes down to that rhythm and flow and that connectedness of your stroke. That makes a difference. Yeah.
That's a big one. And what I've started to teach at clinics is we go through drills, and then we do some swim in between because we want to connect the purpose of the drill to the swim stroke. And one of the things that I've found helpful with that is getting them to think about what you're trying to achieve in the drill. Be in your thinking brain. That's where you want to be. But when you come to swimming, to the swim portion of that, try and go a bit more by feel, because as soon as you're overthinking it when you're swimming, you're going to lose that timing by 0.05 of a second or 0.1 of a second. And as soon as you lose it even by that much, it completely disconnects. So that's when you really want to go more for that sort of feeling brain. And that's when the timing comes in, and that rhythm and connection. And it doesn't take much to lose it.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, a great way to kind of go around that. And I like the way you kind of you talk about your thinking, your feeling brain, kind of speak. If we consider a particular drill, and we isolate that drill to, one particular thing that we're trying to improve for the athlete, then it could be quite contrasting or quite far removed from the stroke itself, right? But we need to think about what that drill is trying to achieve, right? And that's where we're very much in that thinking space in your example. And we need to do it, the right way and appropriately to, the intention. And the drills are just done to kind of get that 400 drill out of the way, drill and swim type of thing in a warm-up. And to me, drills are probably the most important part of the actual warm-up, because that's what sets us up. And, if we think of like priming a stove when we're camping, and we don't need to do that these days, but priming a stove in camping, you're ultimately getting that stove ready to burn. And that's how I feel kind of drills serve that purpose. So drills could change from one day to the next with a group of athletes, but ultimately they are there to kind of prime us to get the job done when the main set hits. And the way it would look through drills there, they could be very isolated and very kind of, left of center, but we need to understand what they're trying to achieve. We're in that thinking space. And then we progressively move that drill into what makes better sense and how it could potentially tie into swimming. And then we get into, levels where it actually starts tying into swimming. And then all of a sudden it's in our stroke. And then we start feeling it within our stroke. And that's how we generally float around progressive means within a skill acquisition type space.
Oh, it's good. It's good to hear you say that, because that's what what I've tried to to do, and do that with the swimmers who come to our clinics, is that when they leave, the way we like them to incorporate it into their training is as part of their warm-up every session if they can. Otherwise, just as often as they can, do some drills that are specific to those things that you want to work on. Do them in the warm-up, get a feel for those things that you want to change in your stroke, and then just go about your main set and your session. And obviously keep that in the back of your mind, but you set it up. You set up the feel for it with the drills, and doing that regularly and consistently is how you'll change that habit and acquire that skill. It's not about doing one session focused on technique once every 2 or 3 weeks, because it's not going to change anything there. It's about that consistency.
For sure. In this environment, as I say, as an unnatural environment as it is in the water, we need to do it consistently in order to get the carryover, for sure.
Yeah, and before we, I know you've got to go soon. Is there anything that you feel like we haven't talked about that could be helpful for some, say a triathlete or an open water swimmer out there who might be stuck in a bit of a plateau and they just want to get faster, or they're frustrated with their swimming? Is there some advice that you have for someone out there who wants to get better but they feel a little bit stuck?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I come from a bit of a triathlon background myself. Was an age group swimmer in school and all that. Got into triathlon as well and was relatively competitive. Mostly off-road triathlon. So yeah, I've been in that position before and being stuck in a rut, especially on the swimming front. And ultimately with triathletes, I feel the biggest struggle with triathletes is often the case of while you're doing one thing, you're thinking about the other two disciplines. And that was always my issue. I always liked dealing with a lot of information. So I never really got to grips with one particular thing, or, when I was doing swimming, I was thinking about the bike and the run, but I was never really thinking about swimming. And we really need to, in the triathlon space, get our heads around, actually dealing with the sport that we're currently doing, right? And really kind of, getting our teeth into it while we're doing it. That to me would probably be some advice I'd give to triathletes, just having been in that space before, because that's something I feel, I could have done better for sure. And then, open water swimmers, it just generally is the case. Monotony is generally where it's at with them, and heaps of, laps up and down the pool, or, laps around open water, whatever it is. And, what I'd say here could probably speak to anyone, but just trying to think of your stroke in a slightly different way, or breaking your stroke, or breaking your set, breaking into proportions, or bite-sized portions, and having a different focus on each of those. And if we think about like a 1500 meter in an Olympic event. Those athletes, the way they think about it is, some of them actually think about it in 500 meter portions, others think about it in 300 meter portions. But ultimately, when we do analysis on those races, I can see a characteristic trait for each swimmer as to what they're trying to focus on. And sometimes it might be every second turn, and sometimes it might be every third 50. That they focus on something different. The rate might change every third 50. Their turn might be improved every second turn. Or they might be trying to even split the third and the fourth, 200, something like that. It's just, there always seems to be a strategy around that. And with open water in particular, they like getting out there and getting into rhythm and getting a flow as well. But ultimately, to start thinking around not necessarily a pacing strategy, but just different, a thinking strategy or cueing strategy. Let Louis probably phrase it in that way. That if we go out there, we want to feel kind of good, easy, efficient flow in the way we're doing it. And obviously, we're not fatigued to start off with. So we can find that kind of easy connectedness and that flow, and not trying to overdo it out front. And then the moment fatigue starts setting in, it might onset slightly early with some, might onset slightly later with others. Then we just need to have a cueing mechanism as to what that might be. And often in open water, that might relate to the breathing pattern. How are we breathing? Is the timing of our breath impeding, elements of our stroke? And often it does. And if I could wish anything upon any swimmer in this world, it would be that we didn't have to breathe, because breathing throws the spanner in the works with regards to swimming often. And dealing at my level, I've only seen very, very few athletes breathe properly, in a freestyle space. So that cue could be potentially around kind of timing of the breath and what that looks like. Then moving on from there, it might be, timing of the kick in relation to the stroke. And, challenge all athletes, doing longer distances to try and find out what that particular point is that they know whether the timing's on or not, whether it's, entry of the right-hand stroke and a kick down on the left leg. There needs to be a critical point that you feel if you nail that, you feel your timing's on. So that might be something you could think about, that middle portion to kind of back end of your race. And then really towards the back end of a race, whether it's 10Ks, a 5K or a 3K or a 1500, to not feel like you need to shift it up a gear and all of a sudden swim a very different type of stroke. That gear adjustment could be quite progressive. And you need to maintain relative efficiency kind of doing that. And often I feel if they try and shift gears, they react, and that's where we start to get in that disconnectedness that we spoke about a little earlier. Does that make sense? Or
yeah, I think that's great, especially so I mean the first thing is being present when you are in the water, and as best you can trying to focus on the thing that you're doing. And it's very easy to get distracted and think about what you've got coming up, or just wanting to get through the session. And particularly with I've spoken about this before, but particularly with swim watches where people are always on them, starting, stopping, it's a massive distraction from your technique. And I think so many people could improve so much faster if they just left the watch in their swim bag and didn't use it while they were swimming, because you are going to get a lot more benefit from actually being present and feeling the water and feeling what your stroke is doing, and feeling how much effort you're putting in for the pace that you're getting, and get that time just from the 60-second clock. You'll get so much more out of that than by uploading it to Strava and seeing that over the course of a year your pace has improved that way. But no, I think leave that in your gear bag. It doesn't help you most of the time.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. When I was running my fastest, I used to leave my heart rate monitor at home. Yeah, that's when I'd usually run my fastest.
Yeah, that's right, because you're just too worried about, oh, geez, my heart rate's up this high, and
exactly. You start regulating yourself around that, or if it's not looking good, you almost start subduing yourself. So it's or trying to outdo yourself, and it is a craze. It creates a barrier. They're there for good reason, I would say, and a lot of these smart devices nowadays give us so much information. It's awesome. But yeah, we get too caught up in it, and triathletes having a space that I've been in for quite a period of time, we get too caught up in that space, and the more gimmicks the better, and ultimately then it's just they become a huge impedance to overall performance in the end of the day.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for being on the podcast, and I've really enjoyed chatting to you, and I'm sure that those people listening have got a lot out of it as well. So thank you very much. And for anyone who wants to maybe get in touch with you, what's the best way?
Generally on phone call, no problem. Otherwise, on email. That's probably the easiest, I would say. I'm always open for kind of, sharing ideas and all that type of thing. Ultimately, to me, regardless of what level of athlete you are, I'd always love people super exceeding their own expectations, and that's ultimately what I'm here for. At the highest level, it's really tricky. We look for marginal gains. It's not 1%ers, it's 0.01%ers that we're generally looking for, and we celebrate those. But at a lower level, there definitely are different ways of thinking about things that could create an outcome, and that's obviously appreciate the work you do as well. And just seeing some of the time drops guys have had, in their triathlon and open water swims, the work you're doing clearly is kind of having an impact. And, I'm all in that regard. So people are kind of wanting to come to me with questions, thoughts, or ideas. I welcome them all. Phone call or email is probably the best way.
If you enjoyed today's podcast and you're interested in improving your own technique, we have a number of camps coming up in 2020 that if you are an adult, you swim in any capacity, whether it's for fitness, whether you're doing pool swimming, competitive swimming, or triathlon or open water swimming. We have a number of camps coming up in Thailand, Hawaii, and Noosa, which is in Queensland, Australia. So if you go to our website at effortlessswimming.com, you'll see the details of each of those camps. And what we do at those camps is each day, or at the very start of the camps, we do underwater filming and analysis with you, and we look at the 2 to 3 aspects of your stroke that are worth working on and improving. Those things that will give you the biggest benefit over the course of 3 to 6 months. And then throughout the camp, every single day, we work with you very closely, one-on-one, where we help you improve your technique and make those changes over the course of the camp. And then you leave the camp not only having had a great time, had a lot of fun, but you will have improved your technique. Your times will more than likely have come down over the course of the 5 or 7 days, and you'll have an action plan. You know exactly what you need to do, and you will have started that process to find yourself swimming faster 3 to 6 months down the track. And so if that sounds like something that you would enjoy, having a swimming holiday and a swimming camp in Hawaii, Thailand, or Noosa, then check out the website at effortlessswimming.com. I run all of those camps, and we also have 2 to 3 other coaches on each of the camps as well. So it's not just me that you work with, but a number of other coaches. Other coaches we have on board are ones like Gary Hurring, who's former Olympic swimmer and Olympic coach from New Zealand, professional triathlete Mitchell Kibbe. We have Phil Rush, who has the fastest 2 and 3-way crossing of the English Channel. We have Eni Jones, who you've probably heard on this podcast a number of times. So there's a wide range of other coaches who do attend the clinics and coach with me, and who you'll be working with on those camps. So hope to see one of them in 2020. Most of them are at least half full, and some of them are already sold out. So just make sure you do book that early if you are interested. So thanks very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you on another episode of the Effortless Swimming Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Effortless Swimming Podcast. If you'd like us to help you become a faster, more efficient swimmer, go to www.effortlessswimming.com.